Hello everyone. I'm actually surprised that at this point in my channel I still have such fundamentally important TF2 concepts to talk about. This one was actually suggested by a friend of mine, Slugmundo, who is in this demo. And it is, again, just an extremely fundamentally important concept. It's conditioning, and conditioning your opponents, usually through choosing to do one thing when you have another option, or vice versa. I know that's extremely vague, but I'm going to give some very concrete examples. Because oftentimes there's multiple equally viable choices that you have, and sometimes these equally viable choices are extremely different decisions or extremely different strategies, sometimes just antithetical to each other. Didn't really pronounce that well. And I'm going to give one example that I give pretty often, just because it's such a fantastic kind of poster child for conditioning, and that is, Uber advantage and pushing with it. So, of course, TF2 is a game about space, taking space, giving up space sometimes, trying to get more space, playing in one, you get the idea. So when you have a strong advantage, such as an Uber advantage, where you have Uber, the other team doesn't, this is something you would like to convert. You'd like to convert this advantage into space, usually by taking a point. So anyway, you want to push into a point with Uber advantage, but there's something in the way, and that something is not only the other team, but also choke points, which are difficult doors to get through. Spam can be quite difficult. Yeah, that's certainly going to stall your progress, and you might just lose players if you don't use your Uber through the door. So the simplest plan is to just pop your Uber through the door. It's a very fast option, very aggressive option, because you get to be invincible and you get to kill them all and then be happy afterwards. And also the bonus is if you kill the other team's medic, then it's add again, but kind of further down the line, right? Because you have to build the Uber first, but nonetheless, you get the idea. It's very simple, very easy plan to follow. Just use your Uber and you get through the door and you get the point. Now, if you're an opponent and this is happening, well, there's a very simple and easy counterplay to that kind of plan, which is you just play further back. If you play in what's called a disad positioning, where you're pretty safe, close access to a door, leaving the point, it's very hard for the other team to catch you with an Uber. And if the entire team is doing this, then the Uber's not going to get any kills. And guess what? If your med lives as well, then suddenly that disad turned into advantage, and you get to re-push that same point, right? So you don't even lose it long term. So playing disad, playing that passive positioning, is quite a strong plan against a team that just pops through kind of blindly. Now that being said, is this just the perfect plan? Is just playing very passively? Not necessarily, because if your team is playing very far back and you don't have that much spam on these doors, you're positioned. Again, remember that there's damage fall off, so the further you are from the actual choke points, the less damage you're going to be doing. Especially like your demo's positioning is probably going to be a lot more passive, a lot less equipped to control those doors. It becomes so much easier to do the other option, which is dry push, or push without intention of using your Uber. Now, it is, of course, always going to be more complicated than I'm making it out to be. Sometimes dry pushes turn into pops because the other team is caught, and you see that they're caught when you get through the door. Sometimes you just get forced to spam or something, or a soldier gets a good bomb off, stuff like that. So it can always be more complicated, but the basic dichotomy is your intention of popping through or dry pushing. And there's very clear counterplay to one or the other, but you'll notice that the counterplay to one is weak to the other. And that's where conditioning becomes such a crucial tool. Because if you can condition your opponents into expecting one thing or doing one thing, then suddenly your job becomes a lot easier of doing the other, right? So this is something that's present throughout. Anything else to talk about, like pop? Yeah, so even in the case of a pop through versus dry push, there's still going to be preferences to one or the other. Don't get me wrong. They are equally viable, I'd say, in the case that, you can in many circumstances justify doing one or the other, but there's certain contexts in which one is going to be stronger than the other. We'll give a couple examples. So a dry push is contextually stronger than a pop through in the case of it being so much uber advantage that if you successfully dry push the point you're about to push, you still have enough add to push another after that, right? So in a case like that, you could get a point under your belt and still bite off more, versus if you pop through and don't kill the other team's medic, for example, which actually you just saw with this Uber. We decided to pop through, didn't get a ton of value. We got a sniper pick, which is okay. It's disadd, and that's why I'm setting up traps here, because we're expecting the other team to push, because again, we pop through, don't get the med, so it's disadd. This is called a flip-flop, I call it. Sometimes players call it a leapfrog as well, and the other team actually just opts to pop through. And they do get 2 kills with it, so not a terrible Uber. Actually, they lose their demo, so I would expect us to fight this, which we are. So anyway, you can see these fundamental concepts come into action here. Of course, exactly how they transpire is always going to be different, but still, fundamentals. Right, so when it's that much add and you can potentially push multiple points with the margins, then yeah, in that kind of context, a dry push makes more sense. And likewise, if it's pretty slim add, and if the other team stalling you for even a moment means that they're going to get Uber and be able to exchange and take a much more even fight on the point than you'd like, then a pop through makes much more sense in that context, right? You want something fast, you want to just secure that point, and then transition quickly to the disadd. Of course, there's minutia and details, such as being ready for that counter aggression from the other team that's very close to getting Uber, or whether you're expecting the team to expect your dry push because you have so much add, so you just pop through anyway. Of course, there's going to be cases, but even in these cases, even in these contexts where one play is comparatively stronger than the other, as a whole and in general, you can still see kind of the interchangeability between these two strategies. And hopefully, even without me saying it specifically, you can start to understand how conditioning becomes such a crucial tool. Because if you're a team that regularly dry pushes, then you can maybe start to expect your opponents to adapt, and their soldiers are going to be much more aggressive on the doors. Maybe their demo is going to be more aggressive on the doors. Maybe their med is going to be more aggressive in order to support those players spamming out the doors. Because if they can successfully get a force and juggle your Uber and suddenly you don't get through cleanly, then that's really great for them. If it goes catastrophically wrong for your team, then you might just not have to give up the point at all. But even if it's your average kind of situation, which you juggle the Uber, get the force and whatnot, you might lose a soldier. You're still refighting that point with add, which many teams will take. So in a case like that, that team that's regularly dry pushing, the other team's making those adjustments. And suddenly this team is much, much worse against a fast pop through. So you have, by doing one thing too much, you've inadvertently conditioned the other team, assuming they're actually making the proper adjustments and adapting. You have inadvertently conditioned them to be weaker to another strategy. And likewise, if you're a team that pops through frequently, then you're conditioning the other team to play more passively. So I actually do remember, it was some time ago that Slugmundo, the person who suggested this very topic, mentioned how he likes, for kind of the first Uber, just to pop through, just because. I don't know if he still has that opinion, but the point he was making was that when you pop through basically instantly when it's add, at the first moment that you have that choice to make, you just go with the pop through. You get to condition all your future dry pushes to be that much easier, right? And oftentimes dry pushes are, if you can execute both properly, dry pushes tend to be the preferred outcome, I should say, because unlike the case of a flip-flop where you have to deal with disadd, things just even out after you take the points. You expect to have the point long-term rather than play the disadd. Now, that being said, flip-flops are still fine. You're putting the ball in the other team's court. There's just so much that can happen in the game that turn them to your favor, yada yada. Of course, there's details, but the point is still clear here, which is you like being able to condition that one thing so that those dry pushes are easier down the line. And I have a few examples of this exact kind of conditioning, right? One that's going to be very familiar to the demo players and the soldier players is on a mid fight. A common strategy you'll see from soldiers is a fast rollout. It is basically what it sounds like. It's when a soldier rolls out very quickly in order to isolate a fight with the other team's demo. Because demo, as you saw on this mid, is the first class to show up. Usually, and it depends on the mid, how long it's a demo 1v1. For a mid like Sunshine, a demo might get out 2, maybe even 3 stickies by the time the team shows up. And in other cases, you might just shoot 1, right? But in any case, demos are the first to show up. However, if a soldier is rolling out quickly and trying to isolate that fight, then they can isolate a 1v1 with that demo before their team and before their help shows up. And if you can secure an early demo for soldier trade, that's a great start to your mid and makes it pretty likely that you're going to win the mid, which is fantastic, of course. So why don't soldiers just fast roll out all the time if it's so good? Well, there's a few reasons. So for starters, your health is going to be worse on this mid because you're committing so much health to your bomb just off the very start. That could have been better utilized later on for different pacing on the mid. You might even be able to get like rebuffed on certain mids and whatnot for an actual commit bomb with your team. And if the demo's just playing passively, it's just so unlikely that you're actually going to kill them. On top of the fact that if the demo, mid dependent as well, because different mids, the strength of fast rollouts are stronger or weaker. And depending on the mid, if the demo is passive enough, they might just kill you. And suddenly, rather than secure a demo for soldier trade, you've just fed and basically lost your team the mid. So it's not the perfect plan, but if the demo is sufficiently aggressive, which demos will want to be aggressive because they get better damage early into a mid, and some of that early mid damage is some of the best you can get as a demo, because if you can get stickies on players as they're getting through doors, you don't even really have to aim. It's like consistent in that sense. So if you are fast rolling out against a demo that is sufficiently aggressive, then it works out fantastically. Now that being said, you can kind of see that same dichotomy start to form as you saw with the dry pushes versus pop throughs, where if you fast roll out on a demo and they get caught to it, congratulations, you've not only likely won that mid, but you've made it so that their demo is going to play more passively at the start of the next mid, if not future mids beyond that. Now, of course, fast rollouts are more successful on maps like Process is probably the most common. Sunshine is quite successful. Gully Wash, there's a pretty popular fast rollout. It's going to depend a little bit on the mid. You understand the basic principle here of conditioning the demo to do one thing on a mid because of that looming threat of that fast rollout. And even if you only go for it once, let's say the first mid of the game, which in the case of Gully Wash, Tomato Tom is probably the most popular example of the Gully Wash fast rollout, because there are some videos on his channel of him fast rolling out and showing up in choke before the other team's demo, which is just remarkably fast. And he's definitely more known for it than many other soldiers, because the rollout's a little hard and he's a decent jumper. So, but point being, when I played a season against Tom, he was not fast rolling out every mid, not even close. It was maybe one mid a night at that. But that one mid is enough that you don't want to be caught on the mid he's doing that, because you just lost. So even just peppering that kind of play in is enough to condition the other team's demo to play in a more contained manner, where they're easier to take care of, right? Or easier to deal with. So conditioning, another fantastic example there. I have some other things written down here. Yes, another great example, also on Soldier, is the commit, I should say, versus fade dichotomy. Because when you're a soldier, you're tasked with a pretty simple decision while in the air, which is whether you want to try and fade bomb, which is where you fade back and live, or if you want to commit, which you basically just land on your opponents or land on high ground near your opponents, basically go on a one-way trip where you are trying to nuke the other team and probably die in the process because, again, you're committing. And there are many bombs in which one makes more sense than the other contextually, same as with all these other examples. However, a lot of the time, it's kind of either or, whether you want to commit or whether you want to fade. And soldier bombs are quite useful as a space making tool. Now, what do I mean by this? A soldier that's bombing forces the other team to back up and to respect that bomb and to look at him. And while that's happening, your team, or the team of the soldier that's bombing, gets to take that space, walk forward, and attack the other team. This is why, one of the most classic mid-fight plans that a team will execute is just double bomb your soldiers and the team walks forward. Because, there's a lot of moving parts that all kind of synergize well together there. Now, that being said, if you're a soldier and you're committing all the time, then it's going to be very easy for the other team to adjust because they're just going to play more passively and play in a way that they're trying to kill you. This is very common on mids, whether you're playing to bomb or just try and kill the other team's soldiers or counter bomb. A lot of different mid plans, but one of the mid plans you'll see, especially on a map like Snakewater, is playing to kill the other team's soldiers. And if you are bombing into and committing against a team that is expecting the soldier bombs and trying to kill you, then believe it or not, they're in all likelihood going to kill you. And suddenly you've just fed both your soldiers on mid and didn't get any kills with it, and now you've lost. So in cases like that, if you fade bomb, suddenly it's a lot better because your soldiers haven't died. The amount of space that you're getting off of the fact that they're playing so passively is immense. And in a mid-fight context, you might just not bomb at all. But in the micro sense, when players are playing passively and you're not going to be able to get much value by committing onto them with your bomb, then fading makes a lot of sense. Likewise, if you're consistently fading such that the other team is not really respecting your bomb because they just know you're not going to land on them, well, suddenly, guess what? They're way more vulnerable to you landing on them. So another fantastic example of just one simple decision where whether you want to go one way or the other influences and conditions your opponent, and it helps that decision-making process as well. If your opponents are conditioned for one thing, then suddenly the other plan becomes all that much better. What else did I have? Right, aggressive exchange versus spam. So in those kind of disadvantageous situations, but not uber disadvantage, as in you're just down players or you have really poor positioning, stuff like that. Uber exchanges are not that uncommon to see. And usually Uber exchanges are a decent pressure release valve, I guess, for lack of a better term, because you kind of get to reset the situation to some extent. If a player is weak, they can go get a health pack during that exchange. It kind of just freezes things in time for a bit for the post-Uber fight. So that can be quite nice against that defending team or the team that's a little down in that fight, just to alleviate pressure and to kind of reset things, maybe take the post-Uber fight on better footing. So with that in mind, you don't always have to go for that exchange. Now, if you take that exchange very aggressively, the other team might not be ready for it. Maybe they're really clumped up and you get to force a lot of flashes, which for those of you who don't know, the more players you flash during an Uber actually decreases the amount of time remaining in that Uber. And whose Uber ends later in an exchange is really important, because if you can be invincible when the other team isn't, I hopefully don't have to spell out that that's a good advantage to have. So yeah, being able to take that aggressive Uber, force a lot of flashes, sometimes even drop players who can't get flashed in time, all these can be fantastic things. But if the other team's quite ready, if they're maybe baiting the exchange, as in, playing further back, hoping to get you to pop aggressively into them, only to back up and in some cases not have to use Uber at all, well, in cases like that, suddenly just spamming them out becomes a much better plan. So again, yet another example, and there are so many of these, to be clear, because yes, this is such a fundamental concept in competitive TF2 is being able to condition your opponents. So in so many, the kind of standard thing I've been laying out here is a dichotomy of choices where it's one choice or the other, generally speaking. And they both have contextual strengths or weaknesses, but in a general sense are kind of equally viable. But they serve fantastically as kind of conditioning tools, because the counterplay to one decision is the weakness of the other, and vice versa. So anyway, I'm sure that people who play competitive TF2, or even just like conditioning is not a competitive only concept, to be clear. You condition your opponents. As long as your opponent is capable of adjusting to what you're doing and adapting, then you can condition them. This is something, as a demo player, I condition players all the time with like trap placements and things like that. Just being able to mix things up is not only good for the sake of being unpredictable, but also in conditioning players to either expect one thing that that you are actually countering, or to not know what to expect and be easier to play against, etc., etc. Now, that being said, I think the final thing I should mention is that a plan being unexpected is not enough to make it good. Like, there are certain doors, for example, that dry pushes are better in or worse in, and yes, you can maybe mix things up as a mix-up for mix-up's sake, but there are fundamental, not details, traits. There are fundamental traits to, for example, a certain door that makes it better for a dry push or a pop through, that you can kind of mess around with and tweak with, but still understand those fundamentals. But anyway, conditioning, definitely the word to understand and the word to figure out, because yes, there are so many different viable strategies and options you can go with that it can be kind of overwhelming of what you actually choose. But being able to understand your decision making through the language of conditioning and through that idea is going to help a lot in making your decisions that much easier to choose. So anyway, I hope you all enjoyed. Really important concept to understand. And yeah, I'll see you all next time.